So my name is Stephen Tosh. I'm from the Center for Extended Learning at the University of Waterloo. I should give you a little bit of background about our department. So our department is essentially a support department at the University of Waterloo, and we help instructors and faculty get their courses online. So we're offering fully online courses with no in-class component whatsoever. So all of the content is online, with the exception of a final exam. Those can still be written, and in most cases they are, and they're written on campus. Or at a designated writing center if they're, I think, more than like 100 kilometers away from the university when they're taking the course. So when we're talking about balancing efficiency and quality, from my perspective as a developer, so I'm not the content expert, but I'm working with the instructor to help them get their content online. And we're trying to get a course fully developed in about, I would say, 8 months. While I'm working on that half-time, I'll balance my time between 2 different courses, so in an 8-month period approximately. So certainly for a 12-week course, if you're building that from scratch, it's a lot of work. So how do we kind of make the process of getting that content online efficient? And then when we're talking about maintainability, these courses that we build to be offered online, we re-offer them again from term to term. So when we're talking maintainability, we're talking the instructor wants to make edits. They found errors in their content originally. We need to go back and make those edits. Potentially even adding new content, things like that from term to term. So how can we design our content in such a way that it's easy to go back into it, make those edits, make those changes without really having to start from scratch again? And I'm going to be specifically talking about Mobius slideshows. So just out of curiosity, I'd like to know how many people at this point have had experience with Mobius slideshows. Okay, that's kind of what I expected. I expected a few people here and there who've kind of been in the Mobius system. So interestingly enough, at our office, narrated slideshows is quite common in all faculties and departments, not just STEM. It's been a very common way that we've made content. But for the STEM group, we've really focused in on the Mobius slideshow, and we're using that now exclusively in any of the future STEM courses that we build. This is the method that we're using. So we've kind of developed a few tips and tricks that we use when we're going through this. So it's not going to be incredibly fancy, but again, we're talking about efficiency and maintainability when developing course after course. Those kind of need to be in place. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the slideshow, we as developers kind of think of it as 4 different pieces. So there's the content, the textual content of the what's being put into the slideshow, and what you're seeing here in the image is the slideshow editor. So this is what it looks like when you're editing the slideshow itself. And then we kind of consider audio a big component as well. If you're going to the effort of making a narrated slideshow, you must feel that at some level the audio is bringing something extra that text alone wouldn't be able to do. So for us, that's kind of a separate part of what makes up a slideshow. Additional media would be things like stock imagery, like the one that you see here, and making sure that that's got proper citations on it. If we're taking it either from a stock image site or somewhere online that we're using it fairly, that we're allowed to use that content is a big piece. And then there's the self-assessment pieces. So because this is built in Mobius, we have the full power of that you would have with the question editor in terms of putting in response areas. We can actually force the slideshow to pause. We can have a response area similar to like a text-based question that you would build in MableTA or Mobius, have the student work on that as kind of a self-assessment piece and then continue on with the content and embed that right in the middle of their slideshow. So I wanted to take just a brief moment to talk about the audio piece because, again, we feel that that's quite important. So if you're looking to improve your quality, we've had a few different methods in the past of how we've done audio before. So in-class audio previously was quite popular, where you would just record an instructor in class, take that audio, and then make something that could go online with it. That is an extremely hard method, especially from a developer standpoint, just in terms of taking out chalkboard noise, noise from the classroom. And the other struggle that you have is pronouns. You wouldn't realize it, but an instructor at the blackboard, they're going to be pointing, they're going to be using physical gestures and pronouns a lot. And so in an online context where we don't have that instructor there to circle items, to point things out, it's very hard to work with that kind of audio. Plus trailing sentences, those kinds of issues come up a lot. So what we prefer is one of the two options below here. So probably the more popular option is the record at home or in the instructor's office. So again, we have the luxury that we have this support department, so we have microphones available. If you're looking for one for yourself, probably $50 Canadian, so translate that into your own currency, but something of that level. It doesn't have to be super high level, it doesn't have to be like music recording studio quality, it just needs to be a decent microphone, probably even newer computers. You could use the microphone on a newer computer. We do recommend getting an actual microphone, so we'll lend our instructors a microphone. And the advantage here is that they can record kind of at their own pace in a way that's convenient to them. But in terms of a maintainability standpoint, when possible, we have a recording studio on campus, and we really love if instructors can make it in there, because the conditions that they're recording in, each time they record the audio, are much more consistent. Even recording in the same office every time, the conditions can be different. You could have a classroom nearby on the same floor that's causing background noise. There could be a fan running that day, things like that, whereas the recording studio has a much more consistent sound. And when we're talking about maintainability, edits are going to be made, that's just a fact. So we're going to come back to this content and we're going to have to splice in audio and things like that. So when we're putting in new audio to already existing audio, how do you make that sound natural? How do you still make it a high quality product without essentially, again, redoing everything from scratch? So once we have the source audio, and we really feel that the source audio is where we make our biggest jumps in terms of quality and maintainability, there's kind of the editing portion. So for, I don't know how many people in this room are familiar with audio editing. That's a big part of what I do. So for me, this is really interesting. There's a couple processes that you can run automatically on any audio file to really improve the sound and quality. So noise reduction, you just take a sample when the instructor is not talking. You can use that noise sample, run an automated process, and the entire file is essentially cleared of noise to some extent. So rather than having our instructors have to record where they just take a single take, because we have the development team, we allow them to kind of go into the studio, do an hour-long recording, get through as much as they can, and then it's up to the developer to kind of cut and paste things together. So that's kind of a given. If you were recording directly in the Mobius slideshow, which you can do if that was the position that you were in, and not that that's necessarily a negative choice, but again, for at least a slide at a time, you need a full consecutive take with no problems. So then that can be challenging, can take a few takes. It can be a lot more comfortable for an instructor to have that freedom to kind of say, okay, I can try this multiple times, I can kind of get a good take, or even we can piece together multiple takes, things like that for a single slideshow. Again, if they record in the studio, then we have that source audio and we can easily splice in the audio as well when we get there. The third option I have there is spot healing. So essentially we're using, to the best of my knowledge, it's a Fourier transform of the audio wave to take out small imperfections and things like that. Now that's a level of editing that we're pulling back from. So a little bit. We still want to take out large distractions and things like that, but small kind of idiosyncrasies of the person's voice, we tend to leave in more now, because the level of editing that we were doing when we first were getting to this really intense editing was just so time consuming that the benefit that was added from really taking out every tiny small imperfection was just not worth the time that we were putting in. So it's something that we're trying to pull back on, and a lot of our developers we're having trouble pulling them back because a lot of them are quite perfectionists. So, but it's important to kind of find a balance between how much time is really worth spending on just editing. And again, for software options, if audio editing is something, if this is a method that is appealing to you, that you're maybe interested in, we tend to use the Adobe Suite because we're also using Photoshop and Illustrator and other products that Adobe offers. But there's almost a free alternative for everything, so if that's an issue at all, there is Audacity, which would essentially be a free audio editing program. I don't have as much experience with it, so I can't speak to it too much, but I've heard that it can do much of what the Adobe software can do. So that's all I really wanted to say about audio. But one of the things that came up is, again, this is somewhat a time-consuming process. So when we were first working with Mobius slideshows, we noted that when we're editing the audio in Audition, which is the screenshot you're seeing on the left there, we have the ability, when we're doing that editing, to put markers in as we're going. So to save us a little time in having to resync the text that's in the slideshow with the audio later, we essentially were having chats with MapleSoft and saying, is there a way that we can use this marker data that we have and just time everything automatically in the Mobius slideshow editor without any work? So we found a free tool called QList tool that can pull the markers out of an audio file. And then there's a button, you may have seen this if you're in the slideshow editor, that says import Q file. So we can use these Q files, we can put them into the slideshow, and those markers there that you see on the left in the slideshow editor, those were all placed using this automatic process. So we can essentially, again, work on a method that's improving our efficiency, so we're not duplicating work, so we're not retiming, doing all of this audio editing, and then having to kind of re-go through the audio to sync everything up later. So now I want to get into kind of the more textual design of slideshows. So again, kind of coming back to this maintainability piece, the overall theme that we've kind of adopted, at least for the STEM developers, is that we want to really try to customize as little as possible. If we're using the features that are in the slideshow editor and the features that are built into it in such a way that a non-technical user can come back to the slideshow and edit it themselves, that's going to be a big win in terms of then they don't have to come to our department and say, I need to make this edit. We find a developer who's got free time, starts on the project, and so on and so forth. It becomes a little bit of a cascade of just time and communication back and forth. So I'm going to demonstrate some of this in Mobius in a moment. But our first step was we created some modular CSS files or themes. Again, if you're familiar with the slideshow editor, these would just be called themes from the front end. And we use those for base styling. Any of the letters that I've put in here are just kind of indications of where we think we have big wins. So I won't go into too much detail because I'm going to demo this in a moment. So we kind of use those for a base styling for your slideshow. And then from there, we're going to use, again, the built-in Mobius structures as opposed to building a lot of custom work ourselves in the source code. If we want to make style changes, we're going to try to do that through classes more often than not. So again, if you're familiar with CSS, we're going to use the CS classes, we're going to make our own theme, and we're going to be able to use that as opposed to, again, coding it directly. And again, just keeping custom solutions to a minimum. So just give me 1 second here while I sign into Mobius. So the first thing I'm going to show is the modular themes that I was talking about. that is kind of a odd term and might be slightly confusing. So I'm just going to pull up. Sorry, I'm in the wrong course. Okay, so here's a slideshow. I have even actually removed a few of the slides that were originally in this slideshow. So I'm just going to jump to the second slide here, and I'm just going to zoom out a touch so we can see the whole editor at once. So we've used some of the built-in features to kind of put some of the content on the screen, but currently there's absolutely no styling, additional styling being applied. And even from a base perspective, like if this is all you had to work with, then I mean you could make it work, but we have these lovely themes. So rather than have a single theme that stylizes everything the way you want it to look, what we've done is tried to kind of separate out individual pieces. And what this is going to allow us to do is for, again, the non-technical user, an instructor who wants to start building content themselves, they can kind of pick and choose a look and feel so that they're not really stuck into kind of one single idea. So these base themes choose a font size for us. They lay out some of the spacing between paragraphs, things like that. So I'll throw on base 14 and show you what that looks like. So already we've seen, we've changed the font of the title and the text. We're now using an Open Sans font, so a sans serif. Not a huge difference, but there are some big spacing ones and things like that. So moving on, the next theme that we would normally add would be a color theme. So we kind of have a color default, color green, color pink. So allow me to add the pink class first. Let's see what that looks like. So right off the bat, we're getting a bit more of a look and feel. You can see that some of the highlighting in the actual text in the pseudocode that you're seeing here has changed to match the color theme. We've coded everything in such a way that if we change the color scheme, we're changing the highlighting that's happening on the text and things like that. And in addition, for our kind of title page here, just kind of a little strip of color. And then the final theme that we add, so we have kind of the base theme for fonts and sizing, the color scheme, and then we have our block styles. So let me add the box style first. So again, not like a huge difference on the title page, a little bit different of a centering going on there. And in terms of these kind of blocks that are standing out, they're now just squarer. So little kind of customizations and things, but I think you can see from where we started, this is already starting to look a little bit more appealing. And so just for fun, let's try experimenting with a different block type. I'm going to switch to the block style left. All right, so this is one of my personal favorites. Again, it's not a huge difference here, but we also adjusted the title screens to kind of change, and I'm personally a fan of the title screen that has the title at the top, and just I like that look and feel. In one course, I just had an image hanging out in the bottom right corner on my title slides every time they showed up as well, for a little extra flair. And then just again, to kind of demonstrate the modularity, let's try switching that base theme up to base 15. So now our titles are actually in a serif font now, if that's something that you prefer. All the titles now across the slideshow will be in that serif font. So small changes like this. Now, again, our department is kind of the support department, and our developers primarily are people with a design background. So for us, these changes are a real big deal and really add to the look and feel of a slideshow. It's but rather than spending a lot of time on them, we now have a setup, and these modular classes are shared over our entire EW server. So we now have enough of a base that you don't have to spend a ton of time on this look and feel anymore. You can kind of pick and choose where you want to start and kind of go from there. Now, if you have a developer working on your project and you're not just developing by yourself, quite often they'll have the time to maybe add a couple extra things to your look and feel. So for this course, I was the developer on this course and I had the chance to do that. Oh, except I need to change the block theme from left back to round. All right, so I did a little bit more. I now have a shadow on my title at the top. These blocks now have a shadow on them as well. They really stand out. You can really highlight content in these blocks now. And we can even put titles in to our blocks to really emphasize the content. So when I talked about in the slideshow about kind of minimizing customization, these block titles are one thing that are a bit of a custom solution. So from a developer standpoint, I had to go back into the source, put a class name on that first paragraph, and that's what gives it the nice highlighting for the title in that area. So it's a little bit of extra work, and again, we're swapping out some of the maintainability because a non-technical user wouldn't necessarily know how to put these titles in themselves. We could create a class that would automatically treat the first line inside of a block as like the title if you wanted to. But here we wanted the flexibility to have boxes that didn't have titles and boxes that did. So we went with a more custom solution that was a little bit more dependent on the developer, just because in this moment we felt that it was worth it for how we wanted certain blocks to stand out. Let me give one more example of how we're using a class occasionally here or there, but this is one that we can train instructors on how to use. So I'm going to go back to a completely blank theme and show you tables and what tables look like in Mobius. How am I doing on time? Doing okay? All right. I guess I had more content than I thought. Right, so if we were to put in a table from scratch, we do have some options here, but I'll even get rid of all of the options and show you what our themes do with tables by default. So if I don't put in any of these options when I put in my table, let's say I'm creating a table of values. So I'll have 4 rows, 2 columns, and I'll have a header row, but all of the other styling I will leave blank. So X, Y, -1, 0, 0, 1. All right, so something like that. So I have a little table of values here. If I throw those themes back on, our kind of base themes, so our base 14, our color default, and our block style box, for example, and hit apply. So already, by default, we've kind of set up our tables so that they take up the whole width of the screen. That was a choice for this course, that we just wanted the tables to take up that much space as opposed to it just taking up that tiny little box area. That styling is already there for you to use. In addition, if I was to create one more table, and here's where we can get instructors trained on how to use classes. We have a pre-built class called Table Chart. So I'm going to make the same one, but I'm going to, in this second advanced tab, just put the class table-chart. So it's going to add that class in the back end. And I think already you might be able to see that I have a bordering system going on now. So in the first table, I have those dotted lines to kind of tell me where the cells are, but there's no bordering. So we've already established the borderings. It's not taking up the full width of the screen anymore. And in fact, I think I left a width of 500 on that. So if I go, again, I have to kind of come back here into the back end, but if I take that off, oh, right, I don't actually have the theme applied. Oh, no, I do. Let me apply the 641 theme. I think it might be in there. There we go.
Bother you with a question?
Sure, yes, of course.
Because I'm very impressed by what you're doing. I will never have this quality. I'm somewhere on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But sometimes I have the students, I work, I know the working groups, we have this problem, and they send me an email, could you explain this? So when I wash the dishes, I open my laptop, and within 20 minutes there's this screencast, writing the solution with a terrible voice. It's online on my YouTube channel, and I send them the link, and I put that link in a specific class in that week, and everybody's happy. That's the other side of the spectrum, but it's working. So I'm very impressed, but it should be a pity that teachers think that bringing online content is so difficult, we need developers. So yeah, the question is how perfect should it be? And then I asked the next day, the student said, well, Nico, do you have birds at home? So why is that? So they could hear the birds while I was recording. I said, oh, I'm sorry. Should I make the video again? No, it's perfect. You helped us, and it should be more than this. So the truth is in the middle, but I'm on the other spectrum of the birds. And you understand what I tried to say?
Yeah, definitely. So the crux of the question is the level of effort that we're putting into this slideshow. Is that really necessary when we can kind of quickly screencast something, was the example that was given, and provide the same kind of information to the student? One of the reasons we want to invest this time is, I mean, we do have the capacity to do that, but we're actually trying to get to a level where we have enough customization options that someone with a non-technical background can use the Mobius slideshow, take advantage of what Mobius has constructed here, and get what high quality looking product with actually quite a bit of minimal effort. And a few of our instructors are building these slideshows on their own now, which is actually freeing up our developers to help with you know, fancy animations, things like that. We can dedicate more time to more challenging tasks where that video editing background is going to come into play, things like that, to provide additional learning experiences. Yes?
Just a question. I mean, I'm not of your world, but it's just something that just hit me, and I'm having an ongoing debate with Steve, which is fun. But so my son comes from the world of fine arts, producing film, and there's like, seems to me, again, there's a gusher load of these young people that are out there that are very creative on look and feel in terms of the web. Have you considered going like over, they produce videos by the gajillion that go on YouTube, and they're 15 years old. I'm just wondering, have you gone cross-discipline into the arts folks and say, I want to see something that the kids are going to think is really cool?
Yeah, the only thing I do in my classes is I talk with my students. I have this amount of time, and what is it what you need? And they say, well, when you know the Khan Academy, and so they say, don't make it any better than the Khan Academy. It's just a black screen with a green pencil explaining the whole thing, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay. It was just a. Have you tried at Waterloo?
So the question being, can we go across discipline to kind of find additional help? And actually, quite often in our office, we are going to the other developers from the non-STEM area, because our STEM developers have more of a math background and less of a design background. We've found that really helpful when they're helping an instructor design a lesson, that they know how to properly align an equation the way the instructor would want it, even if they don't understand the mathematical content.
Get the nuance.
But in terms of a lot of this CSS design, a lot of the STEM developers there, we've learned that from the other developers over time, brought in their experience, their expertise to help us build a theme quite quickly that still has a nice look and feel that just adds that extra level of professionalism.
From somewhere else at the university?
Actually within our own department, because again, we have that support department where we have the developers who are working on the other subject areas and other faculties. Yes,
So
Steve?
just a point of clarification, this is not a small unit. So there are
Yes.
80 employees in the support unit. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's entirely feasible to go to a web UX guy and say, do this for me.
Yeah.
Can I add something on this as well? So,
Yeah, of course.
it's not my talk, but that's
Yeah.
one of the big reasons to do this, and it's easy to forget, is accessibility. So the reason he's adding white space and spacing and larger fonts is so that everybody can access it. And it's easy for us to say, I wrote something quickly and things like that, but then it's when he's going out to a larger group or there's more students in your room, maybe 10% of those students have a hard time accessing that content. So when you design something like this, you design it for everybody. It does take more work in the first place, and what he's doing is putting in tools to make it easy for you to make accessible content. So that is a big motivation for doing this. And it's easy to forget, it just is. And I do agree with you, rough and ready is good, but we have to think about these other people as well.
I agree with both of you, but and I would like to have a nice looking content. My students would like everything that's well designed, no doubt. Makes mathematics easier, makes engineering easier. But what we terribly need is a tool to create easy CSS files. The CSS editor is nice, but only for people knowing what they are doing. It
Yes.
costs us days and weeks to find proper CSS files for our content.
Yeah.
So this address to digital ed, please give to us some kind of editor to even help my colleague who's on the other side.
Got it.
So one of the nice things about Mobius is that you can do things like this and show us the way that it should be done. And then it shows that back to MapleSoft. MapleSoft, that's great, we'll take that and make that options for you. So because it's such an open product, you have this creativity within inside it which developers can do. And then you don't want everyone to have to do that work. So MapleSoft or Digital Ed, can look at this and say, this is great. How do we make these options native in the product to address exactly what you said?
Yeah.
So this is how designers like to create as well. You know,
Yeah,
I
but
think leading in that as well.
please be aware. Typically universities don't have the CL or other departments with 80, 100
Yeah.
persons employed. I would like to have access to these departments,
Yeah.
but I don't have. I'm my own CL with one person, and I have to do the lectures and.
Stephen, just a quick question on the themes that you do apply.
Yes.
Are those themes, aren't they localized to that given class, or is there a way
No.
to make that system-wide?
I'm not sure if this is true for every instance of Mobius, but we have a master class where there are themes and there's one kind of showcase slideshow that shows some of these features displayed and how you would go about putting those into a slideshow. So we kind of have that default theme, and these are shared in a master class that are shared to any class that's created in the Mobius system.
I didn't realize themes were.
You can share
you're putting
themes.
Questions in the master class.
So we're sharing these themes at the university level. So again, now that we've invested this time in creating these themes, those themes are available to everybody, and we actually haven't modified those themes in a long time. We got to a place where we felt we were happy with them. So we've probably been using these themes for about 2 years now, and they've served us really well. So it's really just if you want to make small additions, customizations, and if you have that developer, but if you don't, you can still get to a really good looking product, a really sleek looking product, just using the themes that are available to you that are shared through the university with just minimal training. So I wanted to touch kind of on a few more points of where we're maybe making some additional steps that aren't really complex, that are still maintainable, but do kind of complicate the editor a little bit. And maybe talk just very quickly about kind of the theory behind why we're doing this. I think I'm going to have to cut things a little bit short, but this will be the last example that I go through. That was not the lecture. I want 18 or 7. This one here. So in this slideshow, the problem being presented is that you have 3 pumpkins, and you're told the weight of pairs of pumpkins, each of the 3 pairs that you could possibly take. But how would you be able to do this essentially algebraically? So we kind of have our first solution here where we kind of show the solution algebraically. Again, this is just pretty much straight up text that's narrated. I'm not going to play through the narration at this point. You can kind of see we've timed this to come on screen with the narration, so as I'm going along the timeline here, that's what's happening. So for a second illustrated solution, originally this solution was a second solution that was all text-based, but we worked with the instructor and we said, let's take advantage of the fact that we're using a slideshow, that we're using this audio, and instead of kind of taking that auditory channel and the visual channel both to process the language, let's work with something a little bit more graphical. So we introduced 2 sets of the same 3 pumpkins, and then kind of showed how if we pull those down and look at pairs at a time, and then take away this pair, we can actually come up with the weight of the smallest pumpkin quite quickly without actually introducing any physical algebra. So this whole slide's just narrated. And how we do this visually, these are just images. So pick your favorite image editor. And what we did was we kind of divided it into layers and kind of exported one layer at a time. So if you go into the editor, I'll go into the editor for you really quick here, just so you can see. Again, it makes it a little bit messier, but it's not so messy that it's not workable. So I'm going to go to the illustrated solution slide. So what happens in Mobius is you can take things on and off the screen whenever you'd like, but in the editor, everything has to stay. So you can see our slideshow is just this big, long list of images, but they're all just timed to the timeline to come on and off at certain points. So if I click on the selector for an image, this one, for example, the last image, you can see the green arrow shows me when it's coming on, the red arrow shows me when it's coming off, and I can easily just drag those along the timeline to have it come on at a different point in the slideshow. So we would put each of these images into the editor, time them in such a way that only one is appearing at a time, and from the front end it looks like a seamless animation, but really it's just a series of images. And as long as you have access to those image source files, this is something that's not too hard for a developer, even if it wasn't the developer who you were assigned to your project, to kind of just come back to and say, oh, I can find the source file, I can edit that picture for you. One of the edits that was made to this image sequence was when we were pulling the pumpkins down, people were getting confused as to where the pumpkins were coming from, so we kind of did those shaded out versions to kind of show you, oh, we've actually taken these down from the top to kind of help lead the student a little bit more. So I went back in, I made shaded versions of all those pumpkins, re-exported the images, and then we were done. So it wasn't too big of an edit. So again, kind of these maintainable steps. This is a lot more maintainable than a video animation that you've made in whatever, again, whatever software or that you're comfortable making animations with, where we can kind of design in this way that if we need to come back and make edits, it's relatively simple. I'm going to end my presentation there, just based on kind of the time that we're at. Are there any final questions?
Is there a way that you can mention CSS classes, but like, I suppose like default JavaScript applets, things like that, that you can apply system-wide? I'm thinking like collapse carousel, things like that.
Yes. In terms of the themes, that's a really good question. I'm not sure if we can set that up. We have manually coded some collapse sections for, I should see. I'm going to pull that up for you later because I don't want to monopolize
No problem.
the time that I have. But that's a really great question. Yeah, so you can, I'll show you what we've done on that front.
Awesome.
And very quickly, Steve.
I was wondering if, because maintainability is a big thing for us, and some of our slideshows are fairly complex, I was wondering if you could bring up CNO 250. Do you have access?
Yeah.
The sixth. So go to nonlinear optimization, module 6.
Yep.
And 6A, convexity, the lesson. Yeah. And just scrub it.
Yeah, so this is 42 minutes long, this particular presentation. Yeah, so CO 250 was a really big one where they had made the content in a different system. We wanted to convert it back into Mobius. So some of the techniques that we were doing to kind of highlight content as we went to, again, lead the student's eye visually. There's quite a few animations. Was there anything specific you were looking for, Steve?
Go about halfway, just
Sure.
to show the sort of imaging and mathematical notation that we have to worry about maintaining over time as people make corrections and that sort of thing.
So like some of this,
Yeah.
for example?
And I just wanted to make sure people had a sense of we're at the other end of the Khan Academy.
Yeah. But again, so just one final comment, you can still see a lot of this is we have the text, we have those images, we're overlaying images, things like that. We're using the same techniques that I already described. Again, the complexity of this is quite large, but someone with at least somewhat knowledge of how we put together slides on a regular basis can come in and edit this, no problem. So, yeah, anyways.
Thank you. If there are more questions, feel